maybe forever. Really what we've had is the financial institutions, the heads of the financial institutions, tiny little group, they all talk to each other. And maybe occasionally they talk to their regulators, maybe not enough, but occasionally they talk to their regulators. And now they've been supported by literally hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars. And the conversation has to change. It means the American people also now have a seat at the table. We're supposed to get a lot of information about what's going on within that tight little group. And we're supposed to be able to, I think, to demand some accountability for what's been happening here. And so the whole tension, I think, right now is to try to break this open. And I think the stress tests are part of this. The idea that this, you run it as a, you know, here's a headline, here's something we're talking about. We are all involved in understanding what's happening with this financial system and asking for accountability from it and asking for clarity in the government programs. That's a
So you think we're getting it? Arianna, you're disappointed in, I mean, what do you call the stress tests?
They don't, I say they don't pass the smell test.
No smell test. So let's say it this way. Let's remember last October where we started this. Henry Paulson's Secretary of the Treasury, and he says $350 billion, and it goes out the door with no strings attached at all.
Right.
And in fact, don't talk to me about it. When we ask questions like, where's the money going? He said, I didn't ask, you know, and it's illegitimate for you even to be pushing this question on me. In other words, what was the rating on transparency, on accountability? 0. And clarity, we can talk about whether or not he even correctly described his own programs. So that's where we started. So we start this program in a hole that, you know, it takes binoculars to see the bottom of it. Now, along comes Treasury 2, and Secretary Geithner's in place, and they've made some moves. A little more transparency, they've put some accountability rules in place. He's divided it up, says we're going to do multiple programs, we're going to look into home mortgage foreclosures. That's movement in the right direction. Now stress test becomes the big moment. Okay, so where are we on stress test? I've been asking for more than 2 months for the details about how the stress test works. You know, before we talk about this, you've really got to know, so how much stress is in the stress test? Is it a 2-mile-an-hour walk on a flat treadmill, or is this really an uphill, hard pull? And you can't do that if you don't have a lot of detail on how it works. We understand. And we don't have that detail. So it's a moment. The good news is we're talking about this. The good news is there's transparency. We're trying to get, you know, we let the American people get engaged. We let them have a seat at the table. But it's only a moment. What matters is what happens from here going forward.
It's good. It's half full and it's good.
It's a moment. She didn't say it's half full. She said it's a moment. She said the American people have a seat at the table. But at the moment, we're not being given the kind of information that we would be given if we had the kind of ownership stake we now have in these institutions. That's not capitalism. I go back to that. Squawk Box is supposed to be in favor of capitalism, where in a capitalist system, owners have a lot more rights than we have right now.
I will agree with you on that point. I hear over and over again that the government shouldn't get involved because they're not the owners. You should listen to the shareholders. What about the idea that the government is a significant shareholder?
We're not yet.
Well,
there's no voting right now. It's preferred.
We own 70% of AIG,
right, but the banks, only Citigroup.
Well, the whole point, though, is that the fact that we're even talking about the taxpayer is not a good thing, right? That is not a positive. So when you talk about this small group of bankers who talk to each other and to their regulators, isn't the point to get back to that in some way?
Well, but let's be clear about how we get back to that. It's when the taxpayers' money is no longer on the table.
Right.
And I think that's the critical part here. And it's critical for 2 reasons. It's not only the question of how we're going to try to pull this bus out of the ditch, right? How we try to get the economy started and rolling forward. There's another set of decisions that's going to be made in the next few months. And that's what kind of road are we going to have going forward.
But it would be a little bit easier if we weren't represented by what many people think are an ineffectual group of politicians that can't run their own business. That's just something, right?
I think there are a lot of politicians who should not be there. No question about it, including the 12 Democratic senators.
We don't want Congress, Arianna, we don't want Congress running banks. I'd almost rather, I know the guys who ran the banks, they had some problems, but they can't run their own business.
Absolutely.
They've never run any type of business. You can't have them running banks.
I know, but then you can't have that kind of money that belongs to the taxpayers in the banks. I mean, this is really the quid pro quo. I'm absolutely fine.
It's a catch-22.
I'm absolutely fine with
I wish the taxpayers could control their own destiny.
taking our money back
Did
and
the
not
bankers,
controlling
were
anything.
they able to run the
Well, that's what I
banks?
just said. Maybe they weren't. I mean, obviously, in a free market, there's going to be booms and busts.
Yeah.
I
right?
want to go back to Professor Warren.
go ahead.
Actually,
Lindsay.
no, you gave the perfect one on booms and busts.
Yeah.
Okay, it's 1794. George Washington is in his first term, and what did we have? We had a credit crisis. In fact, if you read the local papers, it was described as a credit freeze. And every 10 to 15 years, we have boom and bust, boom and bust, boom and bust, right? We wipe out, we call them panics. The banks all shut down, have a complete financial system collapse. People lose their little farms, small businesses, until we hit the Great Depression. And we hit the Great Depression and said, you know, we can do better than that. We can write a set of rules that's going to make it work better than that. And so what did? We came up with the first one, make it safe to put your money in a bank, FDIC insurance. The second one, Glass-Steagall. Banks are going to be run like public utilities. They're going to be run boring, modest profit margins. Risk-taking will be where we can let it fail. And the third one, we get these new rules in for the SEC. Those three rules bought us 50 years of security and prosperity.
Right.
And our response to that was to say, you know, regulation's just a pain. Let's get rid of it. Who needs it? It costs us too much. So we start pulling the threads out of the regulatory fabric. And we do it multiple ways. We change the laws, Glass-Steagall. We just don't appoint new regulators for whole new areas. We let the thing burgeon, and we keep the same number of tiny cops
we
on
let
the
Goldman
beat.
appoint the regulator.
That's right.
Spitzer would say.
So we deregulate, and we had information about this. Remember, first thing was the savings and loans crisis, right? We deregulate the S&Ls, and there's a big warning. 700 of them collapse because they don't run this right. The next one, long-term capital management. We're supposed to learn the lesson that when you sneeze in one part of the world, it's heard somewhere else. And then we hit the third one, which for me is Enron, which told us the books are dirty, right? It told us in a big public way that these institutions that are getting all these certifications from the outside, in fact, have dirty books. What were the lessons we learned from that? We just continued on our path, and we collapsed the system.
Isn't that the biggest problem? That Larry Summers, for example, who was one of the architects of the repeal of Glass-Steagall, is there now making the new rules. How concerned are you about that?
Well, so here's what I see as my job, now that I'm in this position of the Congressional Oversight Panel. We are required by statute to make a recommendation, series of recommendations to Congress on regulatory reform. I think that this is the moment, coming back to who's in the conversation. We're going to write a new set of rules going forward. We're going to decide, are we going back to a boom and bust world? A world in which it works really well for that tiny little group, at least in boom times, and if they put away a lot of money, it'll work for them even in the bust, right? Especially if they can get taxpayer support in the bust. Or are we going to write a new set of rules? You got to adjust to the fact that the market's changed, not the old rules, but you write a new set of rules that ultimately are written to benefit families across the country, to buy some prosperity, some opportunity for people to be on a level playing field, a chance to have real prosperity for American families. That's the issue.
You see the SEC right now doing things, going after cases in credit default swaps like they've never done before. Is that enough, or you mean an entire
No, that's not enough. Come on. We have so changed the law, under-regulated, gotten the wrong regulators in there, created whole new markets that have no structure around them. We got to have smart regulation. We got to move. It's not going back. It's not the heavy hand. It's the kind of stuff that lets markets work.
But isn't the new rules, isn't that an escalating involvement of government? Isn't it a stair-step pattern?
Oh, I don't think so.
A little more than we had? Because the FDIC is still going to be there, and we're going to add stuff on top of that.
You bet. The FDIC is still going to be there. But look, you can do modest changes in the rules if your aim is always to get the market back to working properly. The idea is not to keep a heavy hand on it. Let me give you an example.
Or a state-run, you don't want a state-run economy. You want to get out, you want it out as quickly as possible as a capitalist.
Hey,
pointing at me.
Hey.
But also, you know what, there is a lot of talk about Elizabeth on the Supreme Court. And I just want to say right here, we don't want you in the Supreme Court. We want you right here on Squawk Box. Right?
Or if you do go to the court on Squawk Box anyway, you still come back.
You Only too much.
Do you want to finish up on a thought, or do we have time?
I think we got to go, but will you come back?
Yeah.
You bet. I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Without
Thank
Ariana,
you.
you'll come back?
I'll come.
Without cookies again?
I want Ariana. She's fun.
She is.
Chairwoman, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.